At the same time, we have a Reuters commentary where they say Sandy Hook didn't change our gun laws, but the Orlando shooting might. They say the Orlando shooting is different from all the attacks that we've seen in Brussels, Paris, San Bernardino, different from Sandy Hook and all these other places that they list. They say the difference is because now there's an alliance between gun regulation and the LGBT advocacy groups, the very well organized social movement. Nobody has more money, nobody has more clout, really, quite frankly. We'll talk about the NRA, let's talk about the LGBT. They have a tremendous amount of power. They're a very politically lucrative group, and they are going to be coming for the guns. And then they point out, and further in this editorial, they say one of the most controversial breaches of fundamental constitutional rights permitted the National Security Agency to turn its signal interception inward, to spy on all American people without obtaining legal warrants. Yeah, that's the FISA Star Chamber. He says public calls to regulate firearms for national security reasons and possibly save more American lives despite Second Amendment rights should not come as a surprise. To improve Homeland Security, the argument goes, U.S. citizens would be better protected if more restrictive background checks were performed, if people were required to prove good character. This could include not belonging to any group prohibited from owning firearms. So he lists a few groups that we would do right now, like the mentally ill, people who are labeled as terrorists by our government. This is something that Barack Obama and Donald Trump agree on. It's something that Jay Johnson, head of Homeland Security, as well as the NRA, agree on. And they are pushing the narrative of national security, as I pointed out, that false god that they worship, that they sacrifice all of our freedoms to for the mere promise of safety, and we will not get that. And of course, immediately after this happened, Piers Morgan goes on Daily Mail. Of course, Piers Morgan is a friend of Donald Trump. He won The Apprentice 1 year. And he supports Donald Trump in everything he says, except in guns. And he writes this editorial, headline, "We've had a no-fly list for suspected terrorists for years, so why not a no-buy list? It's time for Trump and the NRA to show whose side they're really on." And unfortunately, it sounds like Donald Trump is listening to that. It sounds like the NRA is listening to that. We have reports, and of course, this has come out via Twitter, which is where Donald Trump makes his announcements. I'll be meeting with the NRA, he says, who have endorsed me about not allowing people on the terrorist watch list or the no-fly list to buy guns. And then the NRA comes back and says, happy to meet Donald Trump. Our position is no guns for terrorists, period. Due process and right to self-defense for law-abiding Americans. Oh, let me ask you this. How do you not have, if you're going to be a law-abiding American, okay, only law-abiding Americans get due process. But then who determines if you don't have due process for everyone, not just law-abiding citizens, if the mere accusation of being a lawbreaker, if the mere accusation of being a terrorist is enough to take away your right to due process, what does it mean? Doesn't mean anything, does it? The NRA says they support due process for law-abiding Americans. Donald Trump says he's going to take away guns from people who are on the no-fly list. The first story I covered when I came here to InfoWars was about a man who was on his way to see his wife, who was in the military in Japan. As he flew from California to Hawaii, changed planes, got on another plane to go the second leg of the trip. They stopped the plane as it was about to take off, came on and drug him off the plane and said, you're on a no-fly list, you can't fly. Of course, he's in Hawaii. How does he get anywhere without flying? How did I get on this list? He's somebody who was vetted by the TSA. He had an airport worker's license. He'd had a background check for that. It had multiple background checks for firearms. And yet he could not find out who had put him on this super secret watch list, this no-fly list. And all the time that we were reporting on it, they absolutely refused to tell him what he was charged with. They refused to tell him how he could get off of that list. That is the issue, folks. That is the fundamental issue. Most of the Bill of Rights was written as a reaction to the Star Chamber that they had in England, a secret court that could charge you and try you without you knowing what you were charged with, without you being able to answer to those charges, present a defense to those charges, without you being able to have a jury of your peers present to judge whether or not you were guilty of those charges. Now we've got people on the left and the right, the NRA and Obama, all saying we need to take away the firearms from people who are merely accused of being terrorists. There is no due process in that. There is no. Here's a statement from the NRA. The NRA believes that terrorists should not be allowed to purchase or possess firearms, period. Well, of course. But have due process before you become a terrorist. You don't become a terrorist by accusation, only by due process. They say, go on to say, anyone on a terror watch list who tries to buy a gun should be thoroughly investigated by the FBI and the sale delayed while the investigation is ongoing. If an investigation uncovers evidence of terrorist activity or involvement, the government should be allowed to immediately go to court, block the sale, and arrest the terrorist. Hey, you know what? They got the order wrong, okay? First of all, you would investigate, then you would charge and indict and arrest the person. That would stop the danger right there if you arrest them, charge and indict them, and then you would have a trial by jury of their peers. But they say, no, you go to court and then you block the sale and then you arrest the terrorist, okay? The order is wrong. They also say, at the same time, due process protection should be put in place that allow law-abiding Americans who are wrongly put on a watch list to be removed. Well, how do you know you're on the watch list until you start to suffer the penalties from that? Until you're banned from traveling, until you are banned from owning a gun. And we have to understand, folks, that it isn't just going to be airplanes. It isn't going to be but just a few years before the government will have control over all ground transportation as well. They're going to have a transportation grid, an information highway, autonomous cars. They'll be able to stop and block your car from being able to go anywhere if we allow this to continue. You have to understand where this is going. And of course, this is a reaction to a law that was put out earlier by Representative Peter King, a Republican, a neocon extraordinaire. And he tried to put this in back in 2015, which would basically give the Attorney General the right to just take away anybody's freedoms.